Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to In the Feed Zone. In the Feed Zone is typically on at 5:45 Pacific, 8:45 Eastern, and 13:45 GMT. Let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Jason Flores, and I go by JFlow here on Zwift. So if you see me online, give me a thumbs up. I'll give you a thumbs up back. So let's get on with today's show. Really quickly, today, quick medical disclaimer that the only purpose of this live stream is to educate and to inform, and is no substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. This live stream is provided on the understanding that it does not constitute medical or professional advice or any other services. Some of the goals of the live stream today are going to be to present articles in the media covering food and hydration and how it relates to endurance sports, and to open up a dialogue for viewers to ask questions, to get advice, and to talk about their experiences with these things. Today's article is really interesting. It's actually from trainingpeaks.com, and you can check their blog out at trainingpeaks.com/blog. And I'll go ahead and post a link to the full article here in our chat on the live stream today. Today we're going to be talking about how to avoid getting sick while training. A very, very opportune time to talk about this sort of thing because of the weather in a lot of the areas in the northern half of the hemisphere, or the northern or North America. We are in a colder stretch of weather. So something that a lot of times you'll find is that when we're training, you'll find that riders get to a point where they are getting sick if a lot of the things that we talk about today are coming across their training schedule and regimen. So something to think about. So again, I'll post a link to the full blog article, and we'll go ahead and talk about a couple things. So let's get on with the show. So a couple things that we want to talk about is essentially, of course, how to avoid getting sick during training, and what can you do to minimize your chances of getting ill. There's a couple things. We're going to divide it up into two separate sections. The first being to minimizing exposure of potential sources of infection. The second is to keep the immune system as strong as possible. So we'll divide it into these two sections, and then it'll kind of divvy up and give us some information to kind of take away, and we'll try to wrap it all up at the end for some take-home messages of what we can do pertaining to the type of things that we do that will allow us to avoid getting sick during training. So if we go back, actually, so with the weather, definitely is a big thing, but a lot of times, a lot of people think that it's because of the air temperature drop, that a lot of us end up getting sick and that sort of thing, with coughs and colds, sore throat, and the flu. But with a little bit more research and some information, looking further into it, what you find is that during the winter, riders or just the general population, a lot of times are just indoors more than they are outdoors. So a lot of times things get bottled up and closed up, and the windows aren't opened and not aired out and that sort of thing. But either way, whether you're training or not, coughs, colds, sore throats, and the flu all happen during this time. So understanding what we can do to minimize, as endurance athletes, our chance to get sick are a good idea to see how we can avoid interruptions in our training plan during this off season or this preseason. So how susceptible are athletes to getting sick is the question. So there's this long-standing belief that if you exercise, there's an effect to the immune system that will allow you to avoid getting sick. So they say if you do exercise, it can actually decrease your susceptibility to getting sick. And there's a little bit of a graph that's kind of in circulation. I'll bring it up now, where if you weren't doing anything, let's say on the far edge there, that you have an average amount of abilities or susceptibility to getting sick. As you get more moderate intensity work, your susceptibility decreases. But as for a lot of us, there's an increase or a high intensity amount of workout or intensity that we train at, there becomes a higher susceptibility to infection. So that's something to look at. So depending on the level of stress induced by exercise, what you'll find is that there's a window of susceptibility, typically 3 to 72 hours after a training or competition, especially the higher the intensity. So if you've ever trained super hard, you may, in the next hour or two off the bike, you may experience things like a runny nose, a little bit of a sore throat. These are small little tickles that can definitely tell us that your body or immune system is down. And we'll talk about some things that we can do to kind of help with that. So a lot of times you'll find that that immediate time after heavy training, big races, or even a big stress period at work, you can be just that little bit can definitely put yourself into a situation where you may put the immune system at risk, and then you're not as resilient or be able to fight off infections. So conversely, or oppositely, you'll find that when you're just doing a nice low level of training, kind of a more, let's say, zone 2 kind of easier training, you'll know those days, a lot of times you won't find yourself in these situations. There was a really interesting study that back in the 1990s, that they did with LA marathon riders, and showed that there was a significantly more of them who competed in the race that got colds after finishing than a control group of runners who didn't even take part in the race. So definitely there seems to reason that with a high intensity effort or a long effort like they were doing at the marathon, that a lot of runners, riders, endurance riders can definitely be susceptible to these sort of infections or sicknesses. So what are some of the things that we can do to essentially minimize exposure? So minimizing your exposure to sources of infection involves a lot of relatively simple and common sense safeguards. There's a lot of things that we tell our young ones to remember to do, and some things that we need to remember to do ourselves. They include things like avoiding contact or proximity to those who are ill. If you see people with runny noses, coughing, sneezing, that sort of thing, making sure that you giving yourself some room or some space. Regular hand washing and personal hygiene. So a combination between actual physical washing under hot water with soap and antibacterial ways of cleaning our hands are very important. Avoiding sharing cups, water bottles, and or cutlery, or forks, knives, and spoons. Steering clear of crowded areas such as public transport and rush hour. Sometimes tough to do, especially after a workout, but something that we can keep in our mind to keep our distance from those people at that time, especially if you're coming off a big block or a big training session, for example. It's a really interesting infogram that at the very recent International Olympic Committee actually put together, and they're neatly summarized in this Instagram infogram, excuse me, and you could take a look at that. The people who put together was Jan Limor, and definitely look them up on Twitter and on Facebook, and you will find that they've got some good summaries of the latest sports science. It's really interesting. I kind of looked at their website, got some good information. I think we could actually bring some of that to here in the feed zone, so you may see this moving forward, this graphic. So just some general guidelines for illness, for prevention for athletes. And so a lot of it is stating the obvious, but it's worth emphasizing that precautions like the ones that we talked about, washing hands and keeping your distance, are especially important at times when your immune system is going to be its most vulnerable or most susceptible to getting sick, especially after hard workouts, during races, or extended blocks. For example, if you're doing a standard three on, 1 off block, definitely in that 3rd week, you're going to need to be careful because the stress is just stacking on from week to week. If you're involved with any of the training that we do here at Team ODZ or the Endurance Lab, you're very familiar with that 3rd hard week before the rest week. So be very careful of that. So when we do, smash out these hard interval sessions and then we jump shortly into a packed rush hour train, or it might not be the best idea if you're aiming to minimize illness or getting ill. Finding a more sensible time to do your workouts where you can have some time to recover immediately after could definitely pay some dividends to making sure that you don't get sick. A lot of times it's unavoidable, but maybe making sure that you're keeping your distance during these sort of excursions after your workouts could be definitely better for you. So then the second part, or the second part of all of this, is keeping the immune system strong. So there are a number of key areas that come up, and that a lot of experts are keeping the immune system strong can definitely make a difference here. So even though that we are experiencing or doing a lot of training, we can still do other things while we're off the bike that will allow us to make sure that our immune system is as strong as possible so that we can kind of fight some of these things when, we have to get out and, be in public or that sort of thing after a workout. So here are a couple of those. So the first thing, always on top, we hear this many, many times, is to get enough sleep. Getting a good 8 hours or so of quality sleep a night is pretty much the foundation to making sure that, one, we're recovering from our workouts, but two, that our body is strong enough to be able to fight these sort of things off. Between that and naps during the day are also great if you have time to fit them in. But if you're suffering from unavoidable disrupted sleep, for example, there's a new baby in the house, a new dog, whatever it may be, it's important to consider modifying your training plan to make it less stressful, or a little bit less intense, so that especially on those days when sleep is compromised the night before, just understand or plan that we are not going to be able to put in a very heavy session. The next part is to getting your nutrition plan right. So it's a bit of a wishy-washy term, like getting the nutrition right or a balanced diet, but I think it's just goes to speak to making sure that you're fueling your training sessions and competitions with an adequate amount of carbohydrate and not doing so many of the depletion rides or just trying to go super low on fuel just to reach other goals, for example, like trying to hit a weight loss goal or that sort of thing. Doing those with a scheduled plan of when you're going to do them with the correct amount of intensity would be more appropriate versus trying to do a high intensity ride, for example, and trying to make it a depletion ride where you're not fueling. So can be very, very dangerous. So those sort of things, like going low on the amount of carbohydrate stores or carbohydrate fueling, has definitely been shown to increase the levels of stress imposed on the body. So there was a paper in 2004 that was talking about the use that gets thrown around in the feed zone and very popular media a lot, which is 30 or 60 grams per hour of hard endurance training appeared to reduce the level of stress hormone cortisol released during and after training. But this measurable of immunosuppression or protection would be sustained under the sustained intensive exercise. So essentially in that paper, what they found is that if you were taking in that carbohydrate over that time, the amount of endurance training if you were able to take that 30 to 60 grams in, it would actually reduce the level of stress hormone because the body wasn't searching for fuel during the ride. So making sure that you fuel during your rides and longer sessions are definitely important. So you want to reduce your susceptibility to infection by making sure that you're fueling your workouts properly. The next part would be managing your overall training load. That's one of the things that the riders or the coaches at the endurance lab are definitely a tool, just because you've got a group of coaches that are looking at your training load and making sure that your stress is appropriate for your goals and not to an amount where it will overstress the body, as well as you have somebody to reach out to that will help you plan and manage a program to help maximize your adaptations over time and minimizing the chance of getting sick. So with that, the training that is, there are a couple things to consider. Building a plan that is sensible with the progression of volume over intensity. A lot of times you find riders that will just go hard and intense week after week after week, not thinking about when a rest week's going to be. That's usually the main thing we see. Or the intensity is so high just all the time, high intense rides all the time every week. And we find that just because of the format that we use, of the excitement that we have, whether it be racing or riding indoors, getting out to group rides as the weather gets better, all those things, something that we need to look into. So planning your hardest training times that you'll have the best chance to recover afterwards is really important, especially when there are other life stresses that can affect us as well. So having regular rest days in your program and planning for these recovery days and recovery weeks in your training cycle, that's important, because a lot of times we find riders that are not planning their recovery weeks just as intently and as important that we plan our work weeks leading up and our build weeks. We want to make sure that we're also planning for our recovery weeks. And then Oh, on top of that, working with a coach or mentor, and that's something that our group at the Endurance Lab can definitely help out with, to help you work out a plan to get essentially a second opinion and take it out of your hands, and being able to find a scheduled plans. And those that are in the lab can definitely attest to their opportunities and their success with that. And then monitoring for the signs of overtraining. So that's a big word too, and we do talk about that a lot. And just making sure that you're not feeling fatigued, and monitoring things like resting heart rate, mood and performance, motivation. These sort of things can be noted in a training diary. And if you record these metrics accurately and learn to read the signs your body's giving you, this kind of information can act essentially like an early warning sign to let you know that, hey, something might be going on. So it is possible to modify training and back it off, and this intensity and duration to really avoid running yourself into the ground, essentially. It's a huge problem for athletes, for example, that I work with that are highly motivated. Maybe the weather has changed. Maybe we find that things have changed where they're able to ride outdoors, let's say, more so. They're able to get out and see their friends, or it's just something new to them. Like, for example, when we first start riding indoors and find a group that you have an affinity to. So we need to make sure that they're not pushing themselves through workouts, having excessive tiredness and fatigue, and ending up training themselves straight into illness, which we can definitely see. Another area that is worth working with an external coach or mentor is that they can often look at what you're doing more detached and allow them to look almost like an unbiased look at how much do we feel, or how much as a coach that we feel that you're doing, and how does that affect your health and fitness. And then the last bit here is making sure that you stay hydrated. So good hydration plays a lot of supporting roles in maintaining the immune system. So making sure that you are hydrated throughout a day, and we've got a lot of talks about hydration and making sure that there's a balance between the water and the salt that you're putting in is very important, because these antibacterial enzymes that help kill off germs get a chance to enter the body if we don't have the protections of the hydrations, whether it be in the saliva or the mucous membranes that we have in our body. It's important that those are active and working, and the way they work is being hydrated, and we don't want those fluids to be compromised. So the same way that we talked about earlier about running low on glycogen, if we're low on water, the maintenance of this good hydration status can help keep the body happy, balanced, and reduce its overall stress of other factors. So keeping the pressure off your immune system as much as possible. We have had articles about from Precision Hydration about doing a sweat test to get a personalized hydration plan, and it could be very, very important even for the days that you're not training. So including the days that you're just on rest days, it's important to get your hydration right. And if not more so important, because a lot of times when riders do have a rest day, they don't take anything in. They go low on calories, they go low on carbs, they go low on proteins, they go low on water. And really that doesn't help with restoration or recovery of your body in between. So these are essentially just a couple ideas that help you avoid an unnecessary illness really during the winter months here. And so as we look at those things that were brought up by the article here, really we just want to see kind of how that kind of pertains to us. And we do a lot of indoor training from the group that listens to this podcast. We always want to get outdoors if we can, but you want to kind of take this as a whole approach and kind of methodically look into your training and kind of where that's all coming from, and essentially think of, okay, I'm in an office all day. 2, I'm in a garage or in a room, for hours at a time during workouts. For example, if you're doing indoor workouts, or you're transitioning from a very hard workout outdoors to going indoors, those are things that we need to be very, very careful of as we're trying to mitigate or kind of slow down our ability or to fight off things and our immune system to be strong. And some of the tips we talked about today, getting sleep, making sure we're fueling, and getting hydrated. And then, of course, at the very beginning, just minimizing your exposure into those type of situations are very, very important. So you can find the full article from Training Peaks here at trainingpeaks.com/blog at the end of the year here. They've got some really good summary articles. You've heard a lot of them here on In the Feed Zone. Very, very good information. I look forward to bringing some of these articles into this concise 15 to 20 minute kind of review for us, both here on the live stream as well as on the podcast. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast already, head over to your favorite podcast app and search The Endurance Lab. You should be able to find us in iTunes and in the Google sphere as far as podcasts. And of course, check out Zwift Live by ODZ on Facebook and the Endurance Lab podcast to hear all of our great content, whether it be What's Up with Power with Justin Wagner, Chat and Chill with Taya Friedstead, Skills and Drills with Ian Murray, or myself with the other coaches from the Endurance Lab in the Coach's Corner, and of course in the Feed Zone here. So from here, I want to say thank you for joining us and hope that everyone can take a little bit away from this. And if you have any questions, definitely post up in the chat. I will get a link to the full article here on the site as well and answer any questions that you guys have. And if there's nothing else, we'll definitely reach out, and I will see everybody next week in the Feed Zone.